Allow me to say good day to you as listening to this audio. And as I have written on top that I will be doing this video on the topic cost accounting called limiting factor. Now, as it is my norm that before I read the information provided, I need to know what I am required to do. So now, beginning with the requirements, we are required to calculate the shortfall of labor hours. And from this information, we can discover that the limiting factor or the problem that affect our production or that will not allow us to produce according to the number of units we budget or anticipate to produce is because of the labor hours. Then after, we are then required to calculate the marginal income statement per unit of each product. And sometimes this will be called the contribution per unit, that is the marginal income. So now the contribution per unit for each product does not end there when it comes to the limiting factor. After we have calculated the contribution per unit, we need to then add that we have to calculate the contribution per limiting factor, where we do the marginal contribution per limiting factor. Then after we have done the contribution per limiting factor, the next step now will then to say we must do our rankings. So now where we do the ranking of the products, remember when we rank our product, we rank them according to the contribution per limiting factor. We don't rank them according to the contribution per unit, but we first need to arrive to the contribution per unit. Then after, we divide by the limiting factor per unit in order for us to get to the contribution per limiting factor. Now I will further explain that again when I'm responding to the questions. Requirement number C, we are to determine the number of units to be produced if the labor or if the skilled laborers is utilized optimal. Then now after we have done the ranking, as I have shown you under question number B, we then now allocate the limited resources, and this limited resources being labor hours, we allocate them according to our rankings. Then after, we determine how many then number of units will have to be manufactured based on our shortfall or limiting factor. Then the last question or last requirement is to calculate the total marginal income. We are not required to calculate the total maximum profit. We are not calculating the profit but the marginal income. Remember, marginal income stems from the contribution per unit, which is the marginal contribution per unit, and you multiply that by the number of units, then you get to the marginal income. Then when you are required to calculate the maximum profit or the profit that will be maximized, then after, you have to deduct other expenses that are non-production related. I'll also further explain that when I am doing when I'm responding to this question, but it's very crucial to be able to differentiate between the marginal income and the calculation of the profit as the last question. Now it says the following standard data is available for Albet Ltd for the period ending 30th of November in the year 2018. And we are given there are two products, and their products are Alice and Beta. And these products have direct material cost per unit, which is 15 Rand and 45 Rand cost of material per unit. Then after, we have the direct labor cost, and it is also per unit. But when it comes to labor, it is a bit structured differently than material. We have two departments or two processes, which is a process called grinding or department called grinding, and another department is called finishing. Meaning in the grinding, that is where the products are being grinded, And in the finishing, that is where now the products are being finalized, then after they become a finished product. But still, both of them, these stages are still a work in process, just to remind you of some other stuff. Now, employees who are working in the grinding department, they are being paid R7.50 per hour, and they take 10 hours to complete 1 unit of product Alice, and they take 5 hours to complete 1 unit of product Beta. So now, if we want to know how much is then the cost of labor per unit in the grinding department for product Alice and product Beta, what we do, we take the labor rate per hour, we multiply it by the number of hours, and that will give us the cost of labor per unit in the department grinding, and that is what we call direct labor cost. Now I'm just looking for the calculator now. Yes, there is my calculator. Then now we say R7.50 times this by 10 hours it takes to complete 1 unit. We discover that it is the cost of 75 rand. That will be the cost of direct labor in the grinding department to produce 1 unit of product Alice. But the cost of labor in the grinding department to complete 1 unit of product Beta, it will be R7.50 that employees are being paid per hour, times that by the number of hours it takes for them to complete 1 unit. And we can say that it is an amount of R37.50 of direct labor cost per unit of product Beta in the grinding department. Then now, since we are done with that, then now we go to the second department, which is the department where the finalization of the product is taking place. In the finishing department, we can say that employees are being paid a bit higher rate than in the grinding department, meaning obviously employees in the finishing department are more skilled than employees in the grinding department. So now they are being paid 10 rand per hour, and they take 20 hours, or it takes 20 hours to complete 1 unit of product Alice in the in the finishing department, and it takes 15 hours to complete 1 unit of product Beta in the finishing department. Then we don't need just the labor rate per hour and the hours per unit and the hours per unit, but we need to know the cost of direct labor per unit, not per hour. So now we take the 10 rand, which is per hour, we multiply that by the number of hours it takes to complete 1 unit of a product Alice. Therefore, now it will be 10 times by 20. That will definitely give us an amount of 200, meaning the cost of direct labor per unit of product Alice will be 200, while the cost of labor per unit of product Alice, the cost of direct labor per unit of product Beta will be 10 times by 15, and if you say 10 times that by 15, it will give us 150 rand. So now we do have all this cost of labor per unit in terms of direct labor per unit for both of the products in both of the department. Now we have touched base on that. Remember, when it comes to direct material was already per unit 15 rand and 45 rand. So there was no need for us to do any workings or any conversion. All the figures were already in values that we want to use. Now just by mistake that has been erased. I just said undo. We said that the cost of direct labor here was 200 and the cost of direct labor here was 150 rand. Then I can save and go forward. Then now we go to the next information that is provided to us. And that next information is the selling price per unit. Take note, it is already per unit, and that's what we are looking for. It is 310 for product Alice, and it is 250 for product Beta. Then after, we are given the budgeted production and sales. This is the number of units the company expects to manufacture and sell, and for product Alice it is 1,800 units, and for product Beta it is 900 units. Now we need to know the number of hours that are required to complete these units in both of the departments. But now I still first have to discover which of the department do we have the limiting factor, because we might not have a problem in the grinding department in terms of hours. Hours here might be fine. There might not be a limiting factor. Maybe there might be an issue of the limiting factor in the finishing department, or the other way around. So now we first have to find from the information provided to us in terms of which of the department does have the limiting factor as the labor hours. So far it is not stated. We are still reading and proceeding on that same note. After the enterprise has compiled its budget for the period, it discovers it has insufficient labor hours to meet the budget. So they discover that labor hours is the limiting factor. So now we already know that labor hours will be our bottleneck or limiting factor. Then now they further say the finishing department, meaning our focus is in the finishing department. This is where we are in the finishing department. The finishing department uses highly skilled laborers. We have already identified that. Why am I saying so? Because I did say that 10 rand is the rate per hour in the finishing department, but in the grinding department, employees are being paid 7 rand 50 cents. So surely that means employees in the finishing department are more skilled than those who are in the grinding department. Then it further says that, and it has only 41,240 hours that are available, meaning the 41,220 is the available hours. But we need to know how many hours are required to complete these two number of units for the two products. So now remember once again, the available hours are for all the products and not for only one product, unless it is clearly specified otherwise. In this case, they gave us the finishing department, meaning, and we know that both of the products, they have to go through the finishing department, because we can see there is Alice and we do have finishing department hours, and there is Beta, we do have finishing department hours. So now meaning both of these products have to go through the two departments, meaning including the finishing department, and it's not always the case. Now, or sometimes it's not the case. Now that we have gathered that information, we can see that this finishing department has the issue of the limited labor hours who are skilled. So now in this case, we need to know how many then hours are required to complete the 1,800 units and the 900 units. We know that it takes 20 hours to complete one unit of product Alice, 20 hours to complete only one unit of product Alice. And how many units do we want to manufacture? We know that we want to manufacture 1,800 units. So now we can say 20 hours per unit, multiply this by the number of units that we want to manufacture, so that we can discover how many total hours are required to manufacture 1,800 units. So now that will be 20 hours per unit of product Alice, multiply this by 1,800 units that we budget to manufacture in total. And this gives us a total of 36,000 hours that are required. Remember, these are required hours. We have to compare what is required with what is available to determine if is there any limiting factor or shortfall or bottleneck or not. So for product Beta, we have 15 hours that it takes to complete one unit, and we expect to manufacture in this case only 900 units. So now we do the same thing. We say 15, multiply this by the number of units. We discover that we require 13,500 hours of the skilled labors in order for us to complete the 900 units. Now, we need to know the total required hours. We have 36 hours for product Alice, and we have 13,500 required hours for product beta. So now we need to know the total. We add the two plus 36,000 hours, and we see that our total required hours is equal to 49,500. These are the hours that we need in order for us to be able to manufacture and finish 1,800 units of product Alice and manufacture and finish 900 units of product Beta. But what is available is less than what we require. Now remember, as this is just automatically erasing, we have seen that what is available is only 41,240, and what is required, it is 49,500 hours, as you can see in the calculator. So now this is what is required in terms of hours. So now when you compare our required hours with the available hours, we can see that there is not enough hours that are available in order for us to complete the number of units that we budget to manufacture and complete. So now we minus the 41,240 from the 49,500, and we can see that 8,260 hours is what we call a shortfall. So now this is a shortfall or a bottleneck. So now that there is a shortfall, then we have already responded from or to the first requirement. Now let me just respond to it in the formal writing. So now we are responding to the first requirement, and in the first requirement, which is requirement number A, we start by saying how many hours are required. We say how many hours are required. Even if you start with what is available minus required, for me it matters not. So now what is required, it is 49,500 hours that are required. And these hours are required for these two products, which is product Alice. And product Alice, we said we want to manufacture 1,800, multiply this by the number of hours, and it gave us 36,000 hours. Then we said that will be 36,000 hours. And for product Beta, we said that Beta require a production of 900 units, and each of these units require 15 hours, and we said that it will be a total of 13,500 hours. And when we add the two, we can see that it gives us the required 49,500. So now we say after that, less what is available. Then we less available, and we can see that our available hours that are available, it is 41,240 hours. And now by drawing a line, you will then be discovering that 8,260 hours is what you call a shortfall. This is what you call a shortfall. So now a shortfall is 8,260, and we have seen that. Let me just confirm the numbers are all right in our calculations. Now that we have responded to the first requirement, then we must go to the second requirement, which is requirement number B. Requirement number B is requiring us to determine the marginal income. Determine the marginal income, or calculate the marginal income per unit of each product. And I will clarify something again here, as I did mention to you that we don't rank our products according to the marginal income per unit, but we rank our product according to the limiting factor, according to the contribution per limiting factor. Now our selling price is 310 and 250. So now we are calculating marginal income or marginal contribution. It doesn't matter how you call it. We have our marginal contribution, or let me just use income because it is short. So now we have our marginal income per unit and limiting factor. What do I mean when I say limiting factor? Meaning I'll calculate marginal income per unit and marginal income per limiting factor. Then after I'll do the ranking. I have two products, which is product Alice and product Beta. Then I need my selling price per unit, and my selling price per unit is given as 310, and for the second product I think it is 250 rands. Yes, it is 250. Then now I need to deduct my variable cost. My variable cost is made of direct material 15 rand and direct labor. Remember, when it comes to direct labor, we are only focusing in the department where there is a limiting factor, and that department is the finishing department. So the direct labor for the grinding department is not taken into account because we are not dealing with both of the departments. The only problem of the limiting factor is only in the finishing department. So now hence we'll be taking that 200 and 150 of the direct labor cost per unit. So now we start, we less our variable cost. We say less variable cost, and our variable costs are made of prime cost. If you want, you can say prime cost because it is only the direct costs that are here and are variable. It is direct material, and direct material is just confirm 15 rand and 45 rand. We have 15 rand and 45 rand. Then after we have our direct labor, and our direct labor in the finishing department, it is 200 and 150 rand. So now this will be our only variable cost that we have. So now we throw those two, and here we get 215, and here we get 195 rand. Preferable this should be negative. I am just used to the abbreviation from financial accounting perspective. Then now we have taken that into account. Then after we get to our marginal income. This is our marginal income, and our marginal income will be the difference between the selling price and the variable costs. We have product Alice 310 minus 215. This gives me an amount of 95 rand. Then after we have 250 minus 195, and this gives me 55 rand. And please be reminded that this marginal income is per unit, and I want to say /u, it is per unit, and I need it to be per limiting factor so that I can rank according to the income based on my limiting factor. Now I have to say limiting factor per unit, or labor hours per unit. So now I say labor hours per unit, labor hours per unit. What is labor hours per unit? Remember, labor hours is our limiting factor. So now I have to divide by my limiting factor per unit, and my limiting factor being labor hours. Then I need to know how many labor hours are required to complete 1 unit of product Alice, and how many hours are required to complete 1 unit of product Beta. Then now after I have divided by my limiting factor per unit, then I will be able to get to my contribution per labor hour. Therefore now it will be 55 rand divided by 15 hours. Then this gives me a total of 3 rand 67 cents. And for the first product where we have 95, we divide that by 20 hours to complete 1 unit. Therefore now it will be 4.75 cents. So now this will be my contribution per labor hour. This is contribution per labor hour, which is, in other words, contribution per limiting factor, because limiting factor is labor hours. So you always have to make sure that after you have calculated your contribution per unit, you divide it. After you have calculated your contribution per unit, you divide it by the limiting factor per unit. In this case, our limiting factor, as I said, that it is labor hours. Then we divide by labor hours per unit. Then after that, we can do the ranking of our product. We rank now. Now, when we rank our product, we see that the one that will be ranked first, it is this one, and the one that will be ranked second is this one. And fortunately, in this case, the rankings from the marginal income or contribution per unit would have remained the same, because product Alice was still having the higher contribution per unit, and it is still having the higher contribution per unit even after it has been divided by the labor hours per unit, or the limiting factor per unit, which was 20 hours to complete 1 unit of product Alice. So now, after we have done the ranking, then now we have responded to requirement number B. And remember, requirement number B, I want to bring this across to your mind. Requirement number B ends here. Requirement number B ends here. The next part is not what we are required to do in number B. It ends here. That is the end of requirement number B. So now the next part of dividing the contribution up to this part, it is no longer within requirement number B. Just make sure that is very clear in your mind, though it might not make that much of the difference, but it's very crucial to know. Requirement number B required us to calculate the contribution or the marginal income per unit. It was required for us to calculate marginal income per unit, and marginal income per unit, it ends here. This is 95 rand and this is 55 rand, and that is where it stops. So now let us go and we see the next requirement and how that is linked with the current requirement, which is requirement number B. Requirement number C says determine the number of units to be produced if the skilled labors is utilized optimally. Therefore now, when it comes to requirement number C, this is where we begin. We begin now where we are. Where now we start from the marginal income, we divide it by the labor hours per unit. So now I just would then say this is my requirement number C, but it proceeds from requirement number B. So now requirement number C, we are calculating now the number of units. Before we calculate the number of units, we should have done the ranking. As I'm saying to you that this part is part of the requirement number 3. So we proceed from here and we do requirement number 3, or requirement number C. So now on that note, we are responding to requirement number C, and we, or let me just say, okay, we will then continue to requirement number C, and for us to calculate the number of units, we then now need to say how many hours are available. In other words, we are ranking now, we are allocating the labor hours based on the available labor hours. We say the hours available is 41,240. Then we have to do allocation. Allocation to the first product to Alice. How many hours does product Alice require? We know that product Alice require a total of 36,000 hours, if I still remember. Product Alice requires 36,000 hours. There it comes from. do we have 36,000 hours available? Yes, what is available is more than what we require for product Alice. So now, meaning the next one will be available and allocated, available plus allocated to beta. Then now let us check how much will be the number of hours. So we say 41,240 minus 36,000. This will tell us that the only hours available is 5,240 hours. These are the only hours. Let me specify that this is available hours. So now we can manufacture the entire 1,800 units of product Alice, because for us to manufacture 1.8 units of product Alice in the finishing department, we needed 36,000 hours, and they were available and we have allocated to this product. Why are we doing that? Because product Alice was ranked first. Why was it ranked first? Because we are getting more income per labor hour. Remember, labor hour being our limiting factor. We are getting more marginal income per limiting factor than another product where we are only getting 3.67 rand. So now, because of that, product Alice was then ranked first, hence we first allocated our labor hours to that product. But when it comes to the remainder of the hours are allocated to product beta. Then the question is, how many units can be manufactured? So now, hence, the next step will be units produced. Then we say units produced. Then the units that can be produced out of the hours that are available for product Alice will be the available hours, which is 5,240. And we say with 5,240, we need to know how many units can be manufactured. Then for us to know, we need to know how many hours does it take to complete 1 unit of product beta in the finishing department. And that is 15 hours. Let me just confirm that. How many hours does it take to complete 1 unit of product beta in the finishing department? It is, yes, a total of 15 hours. So now, because of that 15 hours, just want to change the color. Because of that 15 hours, then we divide our available and allocated hours by 15 hours in order for us to get the number of units that can be manufactured out of the available hours. Because for product beta or beta, we cannot be able to manufacture all the 900 units. Why? Because there is only 5,240 hours allocated to this product. Why that is the case? Because this product does not make too much income per limiting factor. So now that is the main reason. Then we need to know now how many units can be manufactured. Now remember, this requirement said to us that we need to determine the number of units. So now that we have calculated that the entire 1.8 will be manufactured for product beta, how many units can be manufactured is the question. So now we have to divide, as I have already said, that by the number of hours to complete 1 unit. And you can say that it will be 349 units, or one can say 350. The rounding off when it comes to units sometimes is it depends, honestly. So now we can say it will be 349 units that will be manufactured, and 349.33 one can say is equivalent to 350 units. So now these are the units that will be manufactured in order for beta to maximize the 5,240 labor hours. Now we have responded to the third question. Then now we have to go to the fourth question. The fourth question says, calculate the total marginal income that will be optimized We are calculating the marginal income. So now number D, we are doing the total marginal income. Total marginal income. And our total marginal income will be made of product Alice. Product Alice. How many units are we going to manufacture for this product? 1.8. How much the contribution per unit? It is 95 rand. Remember, they said we must calculate marginal income, meaning contribution, total contribution. For product beta, we can only manufacture 349 units, or you can say 350. As I said to you, that will not be much of a problem. And the contribution per unit for this product was set to us to be a 55 rand. And for this one, it was 95 rand. That is where this contribution are coming from. So now be mindful of the fact that when we are now calculating the contribution, we don't multiply by the contribution per limiting factor, but we multiply by the contribution per unit. We take the contribution per unit. Why that is the case? Because these are units. These are units, not hours. So now because these are units, then we need to multiply them by the contribution per unit. So please be mindful of that very much. At the same time, if you want, you can use hours. If you use hours, you have to make sure that you multiply by the rate per hour. I'll also explain that for some knowledge reasons otherwise. So now we have we have 1,800 that is to be multiplied by 95 rand, and this will be a total of contribution of 171,000 rands for product Alice. Then for product beta, 349, which you can say 350 times that by 55, then this gives us 191,000 or 19,195. 19,195. So now this will be our total contribution. We add the two, 171,000, and it gives us 190,195. Now this becomes our total contribution or total marginal income. So now we do have our total marginal income. Total marginal income. Then remember, I said to you that you might be required to calculate the profit. If you are required to calculate the profit, then after you normally say less non-production cost. Less non-production cost. Just less other expenses. Normally it will all of them will be fixed. It will be less fixed cost because all the variable costs would have been taken into account. Therefore, now you'll have to list all your fixed cost. Then from there you get to the profit. Other questions, they do have this part. But if they say calculate the marginal contribution, this is where you end. But if they say profit, then there will be fixed cost or other operating expenses that you need to deduct here at the bottom. So be very mindful of that. But for this question, we just end here. I said that I will be explaining this part where you can deal with hours. Remember, when it comes to product Alice, this is just additional. We needed 36,000 hours. And we know that our contribution per labor hour, remember, our contribution per labor hour was 4.75 cents. This was per labor hour because we divided by labor hours. So now we can multiply this by 4.75 cents. And if you multiply this by 475, it should give you the same 175,000. So now we have 36,000 times by 4.75. If it does not, I would have said bye-bye. So now we can say that it gives us the same 171,000. And similar with product beta. product better, we have discovered that the only hours that they can use to produce is 5,240. So now you can say 5,240, and you multiply this by the rate per labor hour. Then if you take the rate per labor hour, which is 3.67 Rand, then you can say 5,240 times 3.67. There might be a small decimal rounding off, and that will be 19,231, of which we have 19,191. The difference is just because of the rounding off problem. So now this is very crucial. I was emphasizing the fact that when you multiply here, you multiply by the contribution per unit, because these are units. You don't multiply by the contribution per labor hour unless it was labor hours. With that, guys, let me say thank you. God bless you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to get updates of the latest videos that might advance your understanding of the subject. Let me say thank you once again. God be with you. Hope you have learned something out of this audio. Thank you. Peace be with you.